morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for asking me to do this. I'm really honored. At around age 7, I had my first breakup. I broke up with a church. I didn't break up with God or Jesus, but the church I was done with. You see, my dad was a deacon in the First Presbyterian Church in a tiny town in northern Mississippi. He was a church elder, a Boy Scout leader. He started a home for orphan young men. He was an all-around do-gooder. Our family was a fixture in our church every Sunday, and the church infused our life at home. As a family, we played Know the Bible games, learning scripture in lessons on little 4x6 note cards. Then Daddy died suddenly at the age of 39, and I was just 7 years old. My mother was racked with grief, and she rarely went back to church, claiming it was too painful to go back there with Daddy, without Daddy. Maybe that was true, I don't know. She never really seemed all that into it. But I was 7, what do I know? True or not, I was delighted not to go back to church. Because I really hated my Sunday school teacher. And the grown-up church was awful. They didn't have a kids' church, so I just had to sit on those hard pews and not move for an hour. And I was particularly glad not to go back to church, to Sunday school, which was taught by old Mrs. Waller. This woman was like out of central casting from Grimm's fairy tales. Yeah. She was tall, gaunt, had an overly large angular nose, and a big beehive hairdo that she could hide who knows what in. And she absolutely hated kids. She was a Sunday school teacher and a third-grade teacher. She hated kids. She was mean and uncharitable and a bully. And in short, she was a terrible representative of the church. Before Daddy died, I had figured out a way to make church and Sunday school palatable, though, by skipping it. I would head into Sunday school building saying bye to Mom and Daddy, but soon as my shadow crossed that threshold, I would furtively scoot down into the basement, into the bathroom we were not supposed to go into. I'd go into the very last stall, lock the door, and jump up on the back of the toilet with my feet on the seat. And I'd pull out my Nancy Drew and a little square box of cereal. Remember those? Alphabets and Lucky Charms were my favorite. And I'd blissfully while away an hour doing amateur sleuthing with Nancy, Bess, and George, solving the secret of the old clock or the mystery of the hidden staircase. Take that, old Mrs. Waller. But then Daddy died, and Mama stopped going to church. All of a sudden, Sundays were weird. That part of our life just went away, except we pretended that it didn't. You see, after church, every person in our little town would head out to the college cafeteria and meet up. I looked forward to this because that was the day I got their rice and gravy and banana pudding. It was a really fun time because all the adults would gather around these big communal tables and tell stories. It was jolly and full of laughter, and I could usually score a play date out of it. But now, if we didn't go to church, we couldn't go to the cafeteria, and I wouldn't get my banana pudding and rice and gravy. Well, Mama wasn't giving up that part of it because she was very social. So we would get dressed on Sundays just like we went to church, and we'd head out to the college cafeteria. Well, Mama would coach me on the way with what to say. If someone asks you where you were, tell them you came in late to work or that you sat up in the balcony. I wasn't going to miss up my chance for that rice and gravy and banana pudding, so I just agreed. So we carried on this charade for a few years. But the trifecta of the mean old Mrs. Waller as a teacher of the young on the path to Jesus, Mama stopping going to church, and counseling me to lie, well, this really informed my opinion of religion in general. And for the next few decades, I had plenty of additional data points to add to my conclusion that the church was not what it appeared to be, and the people running it and going to it weren't either. So as I grew up and moved out of the South and to progressively more liberal and non-Christian areas of the country and the world like New York, Boulder, Colorado, San Francisco, and Cape Town, South Africa, the church, God, and Jesus, they simply became irrelevant. No one in my sphere talked about religion, and in those parts of the world, it was never part of one's identity. I went for 3 decades not thinking about God, Jesus, or the church. My community, love, and the outdoors was my church. Then something happened. I gave birth to my twin boys more than 3 months early. They were born at 27 weeks, weighing slightly more than a pound. They were truly the size of this beanie baby, just like the one I'm holding. When the doctors came to the maternity ward to tell me that they were going to deliver my boys and that one or both may not live, and that if they did, they were absolutely certain to have lifelong disabilities, they counseled my husband Steve and I to pray. Now was the time. We both looked at each other with fear in our eyes and a great deal of the unknown, and realized that we were on our own. We had no God to pray to. That night, while waiting the few hours until my C-section early the next morning, I lay in the hospital bed and I cried. I was so deeply fearful. I didn't know what to do. If there was a God, you can bet your bottom dollar I wanted his or her help. But I was afraid that if I prayed, my babies would be punished for my own hypocrisy. How dare you ask for my help when you've turned your back on me for years, I envisioned God saying. And rightly so. I was in a barren wilderness without guidance, and I was terrified of what I couldn't see. Steve and I discussed what to do. Ultimately, our fear of reprisal from a punishing God kept us from asking for help. My babies were born the next morning and whisked away to the NICU. They survived the birth, although Mitch wasn't breathing for a few minutes. They spent 3 months in the NICU, and Steve and I spent every day there, holding them skin to skin, trying to offer them a womb outside my body. Next, every day in the hospital, I wrestled with asking for help from a spiritual advisor or helper. But fear always kept me away. As the babies grew and conquered each challenge that came their way, I got a bit more comfortable that the Sky Daddy wasn't real. I comforted myself with, see, it's not real after all, we're getting better. So I settled into being the mama of preemies, pumping thousands of bottles of breast milk and celebrating every little victory, like this one, of the first time I got to hold them together on my chest, brother touching brother. Next slide. 2 days had passed since they were born, and most of you have met my amazing young sons. They are healthy, whole, and without medical issues. And here I am, still a non-believer, but ever so much more curious about the gifts that faith, whatever that means, can bring to one's life. I wonder, and it's this wonderment that keeps me coming back here, what if my mind was not so locked down that I made room for a belief system that was not fear-based. What might I gain from that experience? As Anne Lamott says, there really are places in the heart that you don't even know exist until you love a child. I suspect that holds true for those of you who believe in God. I think that this experience was a seed that was planted 20 years ago, and this church, you people, each one of you, are watering it for me. I don't know what it will grow into, but I feel like my own barren wilderness may be becoming just a bit more fertile. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.